Have you ever heard of the Maldición del Quinto Partido? Well, if you're Mexican or Mexican American, you probably have. And if you haven't heard of it, you're going to know what it is today, as we will be going through Mexico's World Cup history and doing a full 2022 World Cup preview for El Tri. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to a very special preview. Today we will do a full Mexico World Cup preview. We will go through their Maldición del Quinto Partido, which translating just literally means curse of the fifth match, but more on that later. Along with us going through their current situation and what to expect from them this World Cup, and much more. By much more, I mean no one less than Herc Gomez. For this video, Herc Gomez will be my guest. He will be talking about the current situation with El Tri, Tata Martino, and hey, some surprise topics as well, so stay tuned for that. And listen, if this video hits 1,500 likes, Mexico or El Tri will break the curse. They will make it to the quarterfinals. And Greg Berhalter will bring Greg Shea to the World Cup. And this video will get flagged for misinformation, but it doesn't really matter. If you enjoy it, just smash the like button. If you hate it, dislike button. If you like me, subscribe. All right, let's play the intro and let's start Mexico's World Cup preview. Throughout history, Mexico has participated in 16 World Cups. Only one of those 16 editions, they managed to play the so-called fifth match. The fifth match nowadays is essentially making it to the quarterfinals with the current format of the 2022 World Cup. So Mexico has made it to the fifth match, aka the quarterfinals, all the way back in 1986, which was a World Cup they hosted. Now, if you go back all the way to 1970, another World Cup that Mexico hosted, they also made it to the quarterfinals as well. However, at the time, due to the format and amount of clubs, the quarterfinals was the fourth match, not the fifth one. Okay. So now you know what the Quinto Partido or fifth match is. It's essentially the quarterfinals. And you also know the fact that Mexico has only reached that fifth match in 1986 when they lost to West Germany at home in the quarterfinals. So why is it called a curse? I mean, they did reach the fifth match in the past. So if they've reached it, they've already broken the curse. No, let me explain. Because the curse started after the 1986 World Cup. Actually, it started after the 1990 World Cup. Ever since Mexico made it to the quarterfinals back in 1986, the following has happened. The 1990 World Cup, they did not participate. Mexico was banned by FIFA due to using players over the age in youth tournaments. That happening was known as the Cachirules. Now, after the 1990 World Cup that they didn't play, Mexico participated in every single edition, and that includes the 1994, 1998, 2002, 2006, 2010, 2014, and the 2018 World Cup. For every single edition of those World Cups, Mexico made it exactly to the fourth match. They got knocked out in the round of 16 for all of the editions that I just mentioned from 1994 all the way to 2018. And that includes the 2-0 loss to the US men's national team back in 2002. That also includes that Arjen Robben's fake penalty kick back in 2014. And you know, that, my friend, is the Maldición del Quinto Partido, that for the past 7 editions of the World Cup, Mexico has been knocked out in the round of 16, which is the fourth match. They can't reach the fifth match. But for the 2022 World Cup, can Mexico break this curse? I'm not superstitious, so I don't really believe in curses. Because keep in mind, the 2026 World Cup will have a new format and expanded to 48 nations in that edition, while this one still has 32. They will end up playing 5 matches just within the group stage in the next World Cup, not the 2022. So technically, this 2022 World Cup in Qatar is Mexico's last chance to break this curse in a legit way. With that said, before we bring in Herc Gomez, let's quickly talk about their current team, and then Herc will do all the expert talking because I just talk a bunch of nonsense. But let's go through their current team. The current El Tri fan base has lots of worries for this World Cup, and rightfully so, which we'll get to that soon with Herc. But first, let's talk about their World Cup group. So Mexico was placed in Group C alongside Argentina, Poland, and Saudi Arabia. And I'll tell you what, aside from Argentina, Poland and Saudi Arabia are very beatable opponents for Mexico, despite the current issues with the national team. Assuming Mexico advances from their group, which I think they will. My prediction is that Mexico will get out of Group C. They always find a way, and I think they'll find a way once again in the 2022 World Cup. They will then have to match up with a team from Group D in the round of 16, which that might be the problem, and that might be why the curse could live on. Group D has France, Denmark, Australia, and Tunisia, which means Mexico will likely be facing Denmark or France in the round of 16 if they advance from Group C. Now, look, I like to gamble here and there for fun, and I would say the odds of Mexico eliminating France and Denmark are low. They're not impossible, but they're pretty damn low. I think the odds of Mexico getting out of their group is high. I would say over 50%. I think they're the second best team in that group. But eliminating Denmark or the current champs France, that's pretty tough, right? To say the least. The good thing is that the round of 16 is a one-match knockout round, so anything can happen within those 90 minutes. You get an early goal, Ochoa has the game of his life once again in the World Cup. You know he can do that in World Cups. You know, crazy stuff can happen. If the opponent gets a red card, they have to deal with that only in those 90 minutes. So upsets are possible. I'm not saying Mexico can't break the curse. I'm just saying facing Denmark and France, they wouldn't be the favorites. Now keep in mind, Raul Jimenez and Tecatito are both questionable for the World Cup due to injuries, and these are key players for Mexico's national team. And Tecatito, despite them sort of saying there are small odds or there's a slight chance he'll make it to the World Cup, it looks like Tecatito will not be there. And Raul Jimenez, even if he is there, he's still not the same player since he got that horrific injury a couple years back when playing for Wolves in the Premier League. Okay, so what are the multiple worries that the fan base, L3 fan base, has for this specific World Cup? For that, we will bring in Herc Gomez. He'll talk about Tata Martino and much more. I'm also going to be asking him just for fun, which Mexican legend would he bring back on his prime to help this team break the curse? Okay, so let's get a round of applause and a round of like buttons, which is essentially a YouTube applause. Yeah, they're the same thing. Hit that like button before Herc starts. Let's bring in Herc Gomez and talk about Mexico in the 2022 World Cup. Okay, Herc, welcome back to the channel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, man. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Doing great too. And today it's a different episode here for the channel because I'm focusing mainly on Mexico. A lot of the L3 fans, they think I hate the national team, but I actually like the national team very much, and that's why I'm dedicating an entire video to them this World Cup.
How kind of you.
I am very kind to them. I am the kindest one to them, but I think some of their anger is well deserved. Like I deserve it a little bit. But anyhow, sometimes I banter.
You like to poke the bear. You like to poke the bear.
Yeah, that's the best thing about soccer. It's bantering among fans. Otherwise, what is it for?
That's true.
So, Herc, the current Mexican national team, there's a lot of worries from the fan base right now. They're coming in decent to poor form, I would say. Poor form for this World Cup. And we've seen that in the past, and Mexico still pulled through. They've only missed, they would only knock down the group stage, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is what I have here, an 82 and 90 when they missed the World Cup. And the last time they missed the group stage was in 1978. They've always made it out.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask
82,
you 82
they weren't there, right? 82, they weren't there. 86, they hosted. 1990, they were banned from competing in the World Cup for using overage players in a U20 tournament, los famosos cachirules, where that came from. So they were punished for that. And people don't realize, like, that generation that missed out. Hugo Sanchez missed out on a 1990 World Cup. He's one of the best players in Mexican history, one of the best forwards in the world's game, misses out in his prime, the 1990 World Cup. So there were some crazy things. But since then, you are correct. Mexico's been a machine. I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but only Brazil can say they've qualified for the second round of a World Cup in every World Cup since 1994.
Brazil since 1996. Sorry, 1966 was the last time Brazil got knocked down the group stage, I believe.
No. Yeah. It's since 94. It's them in Brazil.
Oh, you mean those two? Yeah, Brazil,
yes.
The last time that I remember they missed the group stage, they lost in the group stage was 1966, I believe. But 1994, we would have to double check, but it's probably just Brazil and Mexico.
It is. It is. Yeah.
So again, And then that's part of the Maldición del Quinto Partido, how Mexico has since 94 always gotten out of the group stage, but something always happens and they get knocked out in the round of 16, always putting up a fight against massive teams, right? We saw the Arjen Robben PK in 2014, right. Argentina beforehand, Maxi Rodriguez with that golazo.
Gonzalo Pineda couldn't close him down.
My question to you is this. For this specific World Cup, despite all the worries, which I know you're going to address, what are you expecting? The round of 16 again, a group stage exit, or finally taking down the Maldición del Quinto Partido and going to the quarterfinals?
So the parallels between the U.S. men's national team and the Mexican national team are uncanny. They're insane. Like, both national teams hinge on that very first game. The U.S. plays against Wales, which everybody assumes that's who will be fighting for second place in their group. And Mexico plays against Poland, the very first game. Now, statistically, there are numbers that have proven that if you win your first game, you're more likely to go on to the second round than if you lose or draw your first game. That's not my opinion. It's not yours. Those are just numbers. It increases your chance, increases your odds. It's a perfect game for them in that Poland has some very interesting pieces. Kielinski, obviously Robert Lewandowski, who individually can do a lot. And if you don't think one player can change a game, look what he's doing for Barcelona right now. He's single-handedly saving that team and keeping them beyond relevant. They need to win that game. I think they can win that game. I think regardless of their form, and we've gone through this with Mexico every single World Cup that I can remember, where heading into the World Cup, the lead up to the World Cup, it's a disaster, something's going on, and they still pull it out. And I'll go back, I think 2018, Juan Carlos Osorio was the first time in my recent memory that I remember, that I can recall, Mexico not suffering through the lead up of World Cup qualifying. There's a phrase in Mexico, like saliendo caminando, like ganando caminando, like they win walking, they went through it walking. That was the case with Juan Carlos Osorio. That was the only case. You can make an argument with La Volpe's 2006, but even then there was drama in the lead up too. He left Cuauhtemoc Blanco off the list. But there's always been something, right? 2010, Javier Aguirre took over the team and saved them, and they ended up going to the World Cup. It was a horrendous World Cup cycle. They almost missed out. 2014, they actually went into the playoff game against New Zealand. It took Graham Zusi scoring against Panama the tying goal.
We helped
for them. Yes, Graham Zusi, for them to go to the World Cup. So it's always something. This go around, it's different. And the reason the pessimism is different is not that to say suffered. It's everything that entailed the suffering and everything leading up with Tata Martino. It starts off with the CONCACAF Nations League final versus the U.S., where I quite frankly think they dominated the U.S. They outplayed the U.S., and it was 3 set-piece goals and a missed penalty by Andres Guardado that did them in. So they lost to the biggest rival of final. Then the Gold Cup final in Las Vegas, where, again, they outplayed the U.S. men's national team C team. And the U.S. men's national team C team, off another set-piece, beats them. So now Tata's back is against the wall. He needs to have a good World Cup qualifying campaign. And he doesn't. It's the first time in their history where they lost points, dropped points home and away to both Canada and the U.S., where their only big win was Costa Rica away. They didn't beat Costa Rica at home. They had a better away record than they had home record. The players like Hector Herrera started complaining that the opponent no longer feared going to Estadio Azteca, and the fan base and the ambient, if you will, the entorno, as they call it, around the team was negative. So you have all these things leading up to it, and then you have people saying, pundits, you have fans saying playing selection is wrong, that Tata Martino doesn't even watch Liga MX games. The production and the exportation of players abroad is limited, and your biggest rivals are all of a sudden doing that. So it's just festered in a way where, yes, there's always been this pessimism about Mexico and Mexican football in the lead up to the World Cup, but never quite like this, Filippo. Never this way. This has been distinct.
So, so you think despite the bad form that we've seen Mexico in the past, you said honestly the 2014 cycle, one can argue they were arriving the World Cup in worse form. It was a much worse World Cup qualifying than they even had, and they did find that World Cup. They could have made it to the quarterfinals. They lost to the Dutch team, which was a very good team, and
Very good
we
team.
all know that PK was not a PK on Robin. So you think
There are people out there who believe there was a penalty kick. Listen, things that happen when you dive in the box, and unfortunate that Hector Moreno, one of their better players in that World Cup, ended up leaving that game fractured, right? All these things happen, but it was in Brazil. And remind me again how Mexico Brazil ended up in that World Cup.
0-0.
0-0, and it was Memo Ochoa who had the game of his life.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best saves I've ever seen in a World Cup against Neymar off a header. They seem to come alive during the World Cup in the group phase. They always surprise. It doesn't matter who's been in their way. Brazil, Croatia, Italy, Germany, these big teams, they do well. They rise to the occasion. It's everything else that falters. It's, well, you just beat Germany. All right, now you have to beat or get a result against Sweden, and you choke that away, and they scored 3 goals on you in the final game day, and it takes South Korea beating Germany for you to backdoor your way into second place and a second round, opponent of Brazil. So it's always these things that happen, but Mexico rises to the occasion. So if you're telling me like versus Poland, how will they do? I think they got a very good opportunity.
Yeah, when looking into the bracket and everything, I do believe Mexico will get out of the group stage. I've said this multiple times because historically that's what they do. And also, even looking on paper, their team is as competitive, if not more, than Poland. The problem is Argentina. In
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, you'd expect them. The problem is they cross with France's group after.
France or Denmark. Yeah. And that's the problem.
And then that becomes a problem to break the curse because it becomes something like this. I don't even know, because in the past they could have faced teams that they could have beaten, right? Like last World Cup, they finished first. They would have faced Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken.
They would have faced Switzerland because Brazil. Yes, it was Brazil, Switzerland.
Yeah, correct. Much more realistic than defeating Brazil. Now this World Cup, Denmark and France, I don't think it matters who you face.
I mean, pick your poison, right?
Yeah.
With all the problems that France has in the lead up to this World Cup, off the field issues and everything that encompass Kylian Mbappe, would you still want to face the French team? Would you still want to face a France? Listen, they faced France in 2010 in group play and they did well, right? Everybody remembers the fiasco that was that French team in that group play. There are always things that happen to big teams. France in 2010, Germany in 2018, Italy 2014,
that's why Italy stopped going. They're just like, I'm not dealing with this crap anymore.
Exactly. But the list goes on and on of underperforming, footballing nations or proper footballing nations. So anything can happen. But everything paints the picture for Filippo for this group to be Poland and Mexico fighting over each other, trying to beat each other, and the loss versus Argentina and getting a goal scoring result versus Saudi Arabia, which is not a bad way. I mean, listen, nobody wants to bank on a 1-1-1 and think to yourself, hopefully I make it to a World Cup. If they could beat Poland, tie Argentina, if they can, let's just say, beat Saudi Arabia, tie Poland, lose to Argentina, you can still get into the World Cup, but you depend on other factors like Poland not doing the same and scoring more goals. And 1-1-1 sounds terrible on paper, but I will remind people out there, especially a lot of the U.S. men's national team fans that are on this channel, that was the group phase record in 2002, which is arguably the greatest achievement that the U.S. men's national team has had in a World Cup in modern history. They went 1-1-1. They beat Portugal. They tied South Korea, and they got smashed, I believe it was 4-1 to Poland.
Mm-hmm.
They went on to the next round and they beat Mexico. And they were a handball away, a Greg Berhalter goal line header, handball Torsten Frings away from a semifinal appearance. So I always hear this thing in the Mexican media and Latin American media that, ¿a qué vamos? Why are we even going? You go to compete, you go to try to advance. And it's like, if we can't beat the Brazils of the world, if we can't beat the Argentinas of the world, like, why are we going? I just painted a picture where the U.S. went 1-1-1, beat somebody in the second round, and we're literally a bad call away from a semifinal appearance. So the World Cup is
against
funny,
South
man.
Korea, which we could have made it to the final.
That was against Germany.
No,
Oh,
but
you
if
mean
we advanced,
yes, correct.
if we
And
had advanced, it was South Korea, which we could beat them, and it would have been a final. Believe it or not, Brazil and the United States.
You mean, yeah? I mean, you would have had to face Ronaldo, but.
Well, I think at that point, if you're American, you don't even care if you lose anymore. You're like, we're here. It's something.
Well, if you're Mexican as well, what I'm trying to tell you is that's how achievable it is. Like so this Maldición of el Quinto Partido, which by the way technically isn't a curse, because in 1986, I know it was a different format, less teams, but they did el Quinto Partido, right? They also
I
hosted.
think it starts in '94. That's where the Maldición,
right.
Because Mexico made it to the quarterfinals twice, right?
Yes, but different formats.
Yeah, in 1970, and then and again, 2026, they're gonna reach the Quinto Partido in the group stage in 2026.
Yeah. So but this Maldición goes beyond that. And listen, different factors. 1994, I believe it was Bulgaria, if I'm not mistaken, and they went into penalty kicks with Bulgaria, and then it was, we're always going to lose in penalty kicks. That was the Maldición back then, if people remember, and it bled down to club football. I believe it was Boca Juniors versus Cruz Azul in Libertadores final, and it's penalty kicks, and it's Cruz Azul missing their penalty kicks, and it's like, we're not good at penalty kicks, la maldición de los penales. So there's always something. Yeah.
All in their head. That if you say it enough, it's like that story. I forgot the name of the player. So in Brazil, when they went to play in the altitude in La Paz in Bolivia, they would always tell the players, the altitude's going to hit you. You're not going to be able to breathe. And then what happened was there was this player from São Paulo or Corinthians that they caught a flight to go to La Paz. They had a connection flight, but no one told him. When they got there to the connection flight, which was still in Brazil, he was already saying he couldn't breathe. It's like, I don't feel. And they're like, dude, we're still in Brazil. We haven't reached it yet.
Placebo effect. Yeah,
it's like, relax. We're not there.
Yeah.
So, but I have a question for you in regards to this team too. You talked about Tata Martino and how he didn't really prove himself in World Cup qualifying after failing to beat the U.S. twice, including a U.S. C, B team, whatever people want to argue. That's not the best 11 of the United States in the Gold Cup.
A lot of those aren't even in contention for the World Cup today.
Exactly. But if they want to get into technicalities, it's not the A team. That's it. Was it a mistake to keep Tata Martino?
Yes, I think if you ask 100 fans, 99 will say it's a mistake. If you ask 100 pundits, 99 would say it was a mistake. There was a certain time where you could have let him go. It's too late now. They all would point like, yes, you should have let him go after qualifying. There was enough time. Not enough time now. And evidence to that has been the reactions of these friendlies. Peru, terrible game, even though they ended up winning. Colombia, they were up 2-0 against Colombia, a Colombian team that's not even in the World Cup. That's a different discussion because that shouldn't be the case. This Colombian team has enough talent where they shouldn't have gone 7 games without scoring and eliminated from the World Cup. But the turnaround in that game and the deer in the headlights type of look and reaction from these players, the emotional paralysis, if you will, it's left a lot questioning, Tata Martino choosing to not go to a public training session where the public is going to be there, and choosing, I'm not going to go to this public training session with the team because I want to stay in the hotel and watch Argentina play Honduras in Miami. Like, just these decisions, his health. A lot of people on this side of the border don't realize like Tata Martino's had health issues. He's not traveled to a lot of the away games in World Cup qualifying with Mexican national team because he's got this lingering health issue with his eye, and it's limited his travel. He doesn't live in Mexico. He frequents Argentine Primera games more than he does Liga MX games. There have been player controversies of why certain players haven't gotten looked at over other players. The list goes on and on and on. So you could have made that decision. Tata Martino right now isn't happy. Gerardo Torrado, the moment the U20s lose and are eliminated from U20 World Cup contention, they ended up losing to Guatemala, so they no longer make the U20 World Cup. It was here in CONCACAF. And they also no longer make the U23 tournament, which is the Olympics. The moment that happens, Gerardo Torrado is fired. The director of national teams is fired from Mexican Federation, and he was a huge confidant of Tata Martino. Tata Martino openly comes out and questions this, shows his displeasure because of this. Tata Martino coming out and saying that Alejandro Sendejas didn't want to sign, you know, the commitment, the one-time switch paper that was put to him, pretty much saying that he had to sign it if he wanted to play with
when
us.
He was going into the bus, right? He was like walking.
Well, the federation pretty much before he went on the team bus said, hey, sign this right now, without his representation there, without him even giving him time to consider it. And it didn't happen. But him openly disclosing all this shows you how open the wound is with FMF, and him kind of already being over it. And you know, both should have cut their losses a while back. Listen, the writing was on the wall for me. And when I said this after Copa Gold Cup, that people are going to ask for his head. People are going to say he should be out of there. And everybody was like, you're crazy. How can this be? Because of the lead up, because this is what happens. It boils. I mean, people need to realize, and it's unfair. It truly is. And it says more about our society than it does about anything about a football, a match or a sport. But Memo Ochoa has attested to this. I've said this many times, and Memo Ochoa was on our show at Futbol America, and Memo Ochoa said, you know, sometimes people don't realize that they ask more of the head coach of the Mexican national team than they do of their government, of their politicians. So essentially showing you the responsibility that they put on the Mexican coach of the Mexican national team and how they demand so much of him. And there's just so much scrutiny. I think he's over it. I think the general public's over it. I think the majority of pundits are over it. And looking back on it now, if there was a point where they could cut their losses with them, they would have. Each and every single one of them may have a different answer to where that point may be along the road, where that station, you know, that stop would be, but they would cut their losses.
We also saw Uruguay make a drastic change towards the end of World Cup qualifying, signing Diego Alonso. Won all 4 games qualified. Iran pulled the trigger too. They got Skotic out, signed Carlos Queiroz. They look a bit better. Even though they got dominated, they did manage to beat Uruguay and tie Senegal. Morocco made drastic changes after they lost the U.S. and were struggling with their star players. So we saw teams take that measure. The U.S. and Mexico, there was a lot of people that agree that maybe they should have, could have, and didn't.
Right.
And now they're going to go with what they have. And Mexico also, Tecatito's out with a broken ankle. Raul Jimenez, I mean, hasn't been the Raul we remember ever since the head injury he had. So all of that has to be playing a big role. And I think one thing that you mentioned about Tata is what I noticed, right? He seemed to like take too long to move from certain favorites, right? Chaka was a great example of that. Chaka Rodriguez, no matter how poor he would play, he wouldn't start Jorge Sanchez, which clearly is a better player now.
Chaka can't get a game for Tigres today.
Yeah, rightfully so. Rightfully so. Funes Mori, that I guess you have better options, but Tata really likes him. I think the coach, and this is just my perspective, I agree with that. I think they had the opportunity to replace Tata, and they didn't do it. And
probably the biggest cloud hanging over his tenure was, or will be, and time will prove if it was necessary or not, but the exclusion of the all-time leading goal scorer for the Mexican national team, Javier Hernandez, Chicharito. And Tata's inability to mend that relationship. Like, you could say whatever you want about Chicharito, and there are a lot of versions of why Chicharito is no longer on this Mexican national team, and I will go over them right now if you'd like, but he never mended that relationship, and he made it public. Not only did he make it public, but he refused to be transparent when he made it public. And that lack of transparency has not been good for Javier Hernandez and has not been good for Tata Martino. So there are versions, and it can't be plain. It can't be sporting. That's the biggest obstacle here for people to not wrap their mind around this. Is that it has nothing to do with the actual game. Javier Hernandez has equity with this Mexican national team, has equity with the fan base and a lot of players around him. He's the all-time leading goal scorer in Mexican national team history. No player on planet Earth that is Mexican has scored more World Cup goals than Javier Hernandez. And he's actually being productive right now. I know they could say it's Major League Soccer, but he just ended the season with 18 goals and 2 assists. If anything Major League Soccer has to be, for a player, it's physically demanding. So you know that he's physically there. And it's CONCACAF. You may say the World Cup is not CONCACAF, but he wasn't even in the lead up to the World Cup. So there are versions that Javier Hernandez broke protocol and got somebody within the federation fired for breaking said protocol of bringing people into the hotel. There are other versions that say Javier Hernandez was scapegoated, if you will, and blacklisted because he tried to better the working conditions of the Mexican national team player by asking for more bonus money or bonus structure. The Mexican national team is a marketer's dream, especially here within the United States. The sponsorships, the sellout stadiums, etc. Those players get very few of those dollars. I mean, a U.S. men's national team player today, in my time, would get like 15 grand if they played a top 10 team or Mexico and they won. They'd get 8 if they drew. It was like 4,400 if they lost. Top 10 and World Cup qualifying games, and Mexico. That's the agreement that the U.S. players have or had with the federation in my time. Today, it's gone up. The Mexican national team players would get 2 grand. So there's a huge
while making more money, the federation.
Exactly.
Okay.
So huge discrepancy of what they make to their counterparts, and he was one of the players that wanted to better their conditions. I know this because I was in contact with a lot of those Mexican national team players, and they'd ask me, "Hey, how was it on the U.S. men's national team?" They'd ask the Uruguayan players in their clubs in Europe, "How was this?" They'd ask the Brazilian players. So they got enough intelligence where they realized they were being grossly underpaid. So there's versions that he was scapegoated because of that. There's another version that he's not of the acquired taste of a few of the big players in the locker room, Memo Ochoa, Guardado. There's versions that, he lied to Tata Martino. There's versions that he got this diva-like attitude in the locker room and he wasn't welcomed anymore. There are so many versions that have been reported, actual print, actually on TV, on talk shows. There are so many versions going around that Tata Martino allowed to be created by not being transparent. So that also hangs on Tata Martino's head with all this negativity that surrounds this national team, this program heading into the World Cup, and also this player selection that I speak about.
Do you think that's Tata's inability to keep a good locker room, or just he doesn't care enough to put in the effort to do so? That looks like something that I'm going to quote Landon Donovan here with this, because he talked about the Weston McKennie issue, saying it was almost beyond repair. Everything you said there about Chicharito, nothing there seems almost beyond repair. It all seems very much repairable. We're humans, we make mistakes, and we fix it. It's either Tata Martino doesn't know how to man manage, which I don't believe that based on his resume. He does know how to man manage, I think, or he just doesn't care enough to put in the effort to adjust things.
So, I mean, that's Landon's comment, which I don't agree with.
I don't either.
Yeah. So what I will say is I can't comment for what Tata Martino did in Paraguay, even though I know players from that national team who speak very highly of him. His time at Barcelona, or his time with the Argentine national team. I did see him up close when he was in Atlanta, and he handled a few things very well. Joseph Martinez would throw a fit, temper tantrum when he would come off, and Tata Martino would kind of let it slide, not let it be bigger than it was, and he kept him mentally in check, mentally hungry, mentally going for a while, and Joseph was very productive. He had a situation with Ezequiel Barco and a player who I will not name that was disrespectful to said player, and in that locker room that he handled very well. So there's things that I've seen up close from him which would lead me to believe he handled them very well. With the Mexican national team, I don't think that's been the case. I mean, Tecatito Corona was injured while he was playing with Porto, and Porto didn't want him to travel to a friendly so the Mexican national team could look at him. He picked a fight with Tecatito Corona's coach at the time, Sergio Conceição at Porto, in a public fight because they wouldn't allow him to take a transatlantic flight 14 hours so they could look at him. And Conceição and Tecatito are trying to explain, like, what's he going to do with a bum ankle and flying for 14 hours? It's just going to blow up and you're just going to see it and send him back for another 14 hours. He picks a fight with, I shouldn't say picked a fight. He punishes Hector Herrera for taking time off in a Gold Cup, which Mexico ended up winning against the U.S. in the final. And Hector Herrera is not part of the national team for a while. He excludes and blacklists players like Javier Hernandez, Miguel Layún. He has a very public spat with Carlos Salcedo, which was shown during, I believe, the final against the U.S. in the Gold Cup in Las Vegas, where Carlos Salcedo has a back and forth with one of the assistant coaches. He's blacklisted. Carlos Salcedo goes from being one of the top center backs to not even on the roster. And the list goes on and on of situations that he's had and not really handled too well with the Mexican national team. So while I do think he's done good things when I've seen up close in certain situations, there have been very public displays of him losing certain players or just not caring about certain players or certain situations. And now it's him literally picking fights with the media. I mean, one of the last press conferences here in Los Angeles, I believe it was at the Rose Bowl after the game. Don't quote me on it. I believe it was at the Rose Bowl after the game against Peru. A reporter asked him if what he wants out of his 9 is more system and to associate and combine with others instead of being a goal scorer, and if that's correct. And Tata Martino, in the most ironic, and kind of like in your face type of way, said, I've been waiting 4 years for somebody to ask me a soccer question. I want to hug you. That's a slap in the face to a lot of those journalists and a lot of the pundits, in this game around the region who cover him. So he's taking public shots now.
That's a little funny though.
It is funny, but it's like if you ask Greg Berhalter, like, all right, so you don't care if your 9 scores because you want him doing other things, and he's like, oh look, this guy's smart, like. It's funny. Yeah. It's funny in a way, but it's also like it's unnecessary. You shouldn't be trying to fight with the press in that way. So, he's gotten to the point, I think, where he doesn't care.
Yeah, and I think one part of the coaching aspect that many fans and even pundits don't take into consideration is we always look too much into the player selection and tactics. And then we forget that man management and public relationships are as important, if not even more. Right?
Yeah.
Some coaches, I talked to a guy that has worked in the past with Sir Alex, which is the coach that everyone looks like the genius, the tech.
Yeah.
He said the strongest thing of Sir Alex was his man management. It wasn't tactics.
Of course.
That's not what it was.
Yeah.
He knew how to manage the team, keep the group together, focused, and knew how to win. But it wasn't tactics. He said, I've worked with coaches that were way better tactically than Sir Alex, but he's the winner.
Yeah. I could attest to that sentiment. Sometimes the coaches who get the best out of you, zero idea tactically, but they know how to manage a group. They know how to keep players happy, hungry, motivated. They know how to move the chess pieces in that way, or anticipate certain problems before they start, not on the field, but off the field. And that is something very valuable. It goes for players too. When we talk player selection, like, sometimes we get too in the weeds, like, why this player who's probably the number 23 on the list or 22 on the list? Why not that player? He performs better. And I'll give you an example, like Marcus Hanneman was the third goalkeeper at the 2010 World Cup when I went. Marcus Hanneman is probably, like, a lot of casual fans have no idea who he was, and they probably could have said, well, this kid could have been, a player for the future. Why didn't they take this guy? And they took a guy who's almost 40, to the World Cup. Marcus Hanneman is like one of those glue guys. And Marcus Hanneman was like one of those guys that spoke like from his chest, shot straight from the hip. Like, you knew what you were getting with him, and it was good for the locker room. All goalies are weird. He was a weirdo, but he was such a great guy for the locker room and kept even big players in check. I remember a conversation at the World Cup where Marcus Hanneman had a go with Landon. And like, Marcus has been there and done that. Over a decade's worth in the Premier League, Championship, respected player, and a big guy. And he was one of the older guys. So it wasn't like Landon was going to say something to him, if you will. But people, and even Landon, would respect that. People respected that. So there's certain guys that are glue guys, certain guys that are good situational players or for the locker room that coaches want to manage, and it goes into what you're saying, manage the group, manage the team. The best coaches in the world understand the need for things like that.
Yeah, you're not just a tactician and a guy that delivers the jerseys of who's going to play. You are
Yeah,
actually almost like a CEO of a company, and you
yeah,
have to know how to manage. That's why in Europe they call them managers, not coaches. That's one of the
right.
reasons, right? We
Yeah.
call him head coach, like Greg Berhalter, Tata Martino, the head coach of Mexico. But no, they're managers. That's what
Well,
they are.
In Europe, a lot of times those managers or those misters don't even run the sessions. You know,
Hmm.
it's like their assistant coaches running the sessions, and they're managing, they're delegating, they're overseeing, they're caretaking everything. Listen, they're different strokes for different folks, different ways of doing things. But those coaches, to me, are very valuable because when you play at a certain level, you're not going to show like, listen, there are your Pep Guardiolas, those type of coaches, and you have to respect the way they see the game and the way they move the pieces. Very good pieces that they're moving, but the majority of players who are at a certain level, you're not going to really show too much. They're not going to really learn too much that's going to change their game. You may mold them a certain way to affect your scheme or your squad, but everything they've learned up to a certain point, it's there. They're good enough to play.
One thing
You
I
know,
wanted to ask you, Herc, completely off topic of this like more serious topic that we're talking about here. If you had to pick one Mexican player throughout history, any Mexican player throughout history, and you can go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, or you can even go to Chicharito right now, in his prime, right? Who would you pick for this national team? And the reason I ask this is just to close out the episode in more of like a Mexico fantasy team, like something more light, because we've
yeah,
been talking about this World Cup. And then after
yeah,
that, I just want your quick prediction on Mexico this World Cup. But who would you pick and why?
that's an easy one. With and people are gonna say, well, the nine situation, pick Hugo Sanchez, right? Hugo Sanchez wasn't necessarily like that big player for Mexico, for the Mexican national team. Like there are a lot of forwards with better numbers than Hugo Sanchez. Unbelievable player for Real Madrid, Penta Pichichi. Probably the figurehead when you think Mexican football across the pond. Like that's who you're gonna say. It's Hugo Sanchez, right? Rafa Marquez, Penta World Cup captain in all those World Cup that he participated in. But I don't necessarily think you may need him with this current national team, and you know sometimes his emotions got the best of him, and as you could see in that second round loss to the U.S. men's national team, where I believe it was Kobe Jones that he left his
He
shoe
behaved
across his.
better. He behaved better for Barcelona.
Exactly. This one is easy to me. It's Cuauhtémoc Blanco. Cuauhtémoc Blanco epitomizes personalidad, carácter, leadership qualities with a high game IQ and level. I played with Cuauhtémoc Blanco when he was like 40 at Puebla. A guy who was, you look at him, out of shape, pudgy, didn't move too much. But try taking the ball from him. Like it was impossible to take the ball from him. And as a forward, if I made an intelligent run, it was on my foot or on my head with only the goalkeeper to beat. He's one of the most intelligent players I've ever played with. I've seen him in his prime. You could put him anywhere across that line. You can put him in any situation, positive or negative, for a team, and he's the guy you want. Personality-wise, he will say the right things. He will be the man to stand up to others or to anybody in that locker room. Technically as gifted as any player that the Mexican national team has ever had. Killer instincts in or around the box. In his prime, much more of a player that went at defenders, dribbling. Mexico may never see another player like Cuauhtémoc Blanco. And when he put that green jersey on, he transformed. He epitomizes the Mexican mentality. And what I say by that is, when you talk about boxing, for those boxing fans out there, there's a mentality of a Mexican boxer of always going front, like siempre adelante, like you're always going to try to hurt somebody. You're not going to be a counter fighter, a counter puncher. You're not going to be defensive. You're going to go down on your shield. He is that type of mentality. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better footballer.
I wonder what most Mexico fans would pick. And I feel like they would have picked probably the most common one would be the ones you mentioned first. Hugo Sanchez and Rafa Marquez would probably be the first ones that would come to mind. And I think that's all. Before we close it here, because this is the last thing, Mexico gets out of the group or not?
Yes, they get out of the group. Yes, but I don't think it's funny. Just to put this in context, the U.S. gets more possibilities of going further, but they may end up in the same place.
Makes total sense.
The cross for the U.S. Yes, the cross for the U.S. would be Senegal, Ecuador, Qatar, or Netherlands. So theoretically, they'd have a better chance of beating those said teams than Mexico would have of Denmark or France. But ultimately, I think they both may just get to the same place.
I think the best way to close it is just saying Denmark and France would probably top Group A.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Herc. And guys, before you all leave, don't forget to smash the like button. Check out Herc's channel, Herc Gomez, and Futbol America's as well. Oh, Piojo and Tom Brady.
That's right.
You know who's missing in that T-shirt for it to be worth gold? Breck Shea.
That's my man.
If you add Breck Shea right there and mix Discarude, it's over.
Well, it would be over.
Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Don't forget to check out Futbol Americas with Herc Gomez and Seba Salazar. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to be doing many more World Cup previews here on the channel. Brazil, Canada, United States, Argentina, Uruguay, and much more. Drop a comment down below any other national teams you want us covering. Don't forget to smash the like button before you go and drop a comment. Do you think Mexico will make it to the quarterfinals this World Cup or not? And tell me why. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.